Okay. Some vocabulary. This is called a function name. This is an argument. Some functions require more than one argument. Some functions require zero arguments. Um, an argument could also be called an input to a function, and the square root of -1 produces an output, which, as you can see, is of type double. That means the output type is a double. So what gets stored in 5 is a double in this case, because I declared double the variable 5 to be of type double. This is called a function call. So we often put comments like something like this: call the function POW. So this is an example of calling the function POW with the arguments 4 and 3, 4 raised to the third power. This is a bit of a silly function call because the 4 raised to the third power is calculated, but it's not stored in a variable like this. It's not stored, and it's not also not printed. So this function call is kind of useless. And if I run this program, generally Visual Studio will, so we don't see 4 to the power of 364 being displayed anywhere here. Yeah, you see this compiler, not an error, but a warning, 6031, saying that the return value is ignored. If we click that link and open up Microsoft's website, the documentation, we can see another example of this. In this case, it's related to opening a file, seems like. But this is nice that the warning is generated here. Be careful not to do useless things, of course. I'm going to delete some of that code just to make this look cleaner. We want to be careful about the types of the arguments that we pass. If we say string greeting equal hello, it doesn't make sense to a human to take the square root of this value, but we could try to get the computer to do it for us, except there is an error here. It says no flavor of the square root function matches takes a string type variable as its argument. We can take the square root of characters, like the character A, interestingly enough. If we run this program, we see 9.84. So what does that mean? What if we take 9.84, okay, I think something funny is going on with my numpad. 9.84 times 9.84 equals 96.8. If we were to look up an ASCII table, we will see the letter A as the decimal value here, 97, which is pretty close to this 96.8. So this A is getting interpreted as its decimal value, which is A equal 97. It's a little bit funny to say A is equal to 97, but this is kind of related to, it is related to the precursor to ASCII, which is Morse code. Okay. Let me just say similar to Morse code. Okay. There's the simplest, one of the most useful string functions. If I uncomment this variable named, this variable declaration an initialization called hello. If I see out greeting.length, this length function here, it returns, if we hover on the name of the function, it returns a variable type called size underscore t. And there's some complexities regarding what the meaning of size underscore t is, but let's just think of it as an integer. An integer, like a number like 6, 72, -1, except in this case, the length is going to be the number of characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not related to the number of bytes or anything. It is related to the number of bytes in a way, but 6 characters. Okay, we'll talk a lot more about string functions later. This convert to a C, what's called a C string, find the first instance of a particular character, take a substring, append to the string, etc., etc., etc. All these functions, most all of those functions. But that is useful for doing, or I require students to do that for a particular lab assignment. I think it's, I can't remember which one it is, project 1 maybe. You might have been confused, as I was some time ago, by, why is it that we don't put the argument that is this string type variable in parentheses here and take the length of it this way? This generates an error, and there's some complicated ways of getting around this. But for now, let me just say that greeting is called an object of the string class, and objects, the syntax for using functions on objects, what are called member functions, members of a class, of this string class. The syntax is to type a dot and then type the function name and type parentheses here. And sometimes there are arguments that go into these functions, but not in this particular case. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk more about this a lot more in Programming Fundamentals 2 or CS2. What's called at some universities, CS2, or the second course in programming typically covers object-oriented, this thing called object-oriented programming. It's nice to be able to display large values sometimes. If we would like to display the value 1 million and not get confused by all these zeros, this is legal, this use of an apostrophe in C++. You might be bothered that you don't see any, it's hard to read this on the terminal output. There's a function, I think, called cout.mbu, standard locale. Let's not worry about what exactly is going on here, but if you include this is something that's not in my slides. You can see numbers like this, so that can be very convenient to be aware of. So yeah, it's an apostrophe, not a comma. So not a comma like this generates an error. Commas here, maybe you think there need to be commas in all the typical positions, but this is a problem. Similarly, if you're from a culture that uses the decimal separator rather than commas, this is also problematic. So let's use this apostrophe here to print this. Okay. And we can also pass this as arguments. So we could say the square root of 1 billion is 31,622.8. Okay, jolly good. If you'd like to see binary numbers, which is it has the potential to be a wonderful thing. You include this sort of prefix, a binary. That's just 1000B. 0B100. What is this value and what's going to get printed? There's no error here, no red squiggle appears. This is the value 4 in binary. And if we add another 0 here, we might know that this is the value 8. And you can see this again in the Windows calculator. It's convenient. Usually I think this is Windows 10 or 11, and I think this programmer calculator comes built into it. So if we switch to binary mode, again, we have only 1 and 0 here. 1, 0, 0 is decimal value 4. 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0 is decimal value 8. Okay, and I think you can also put in separators like this. So this is a fairly special value in computer programming, 128. And that is equivalent to the 2 raised to the power 7. Let's see. 2 to the power 7 and 2 raised to the power 7 is my mistake. I was misinterpreting the X button. Anyways, XY. Yeah. 2x 7. Okay. Well, clear. 2x 7. 128. Okay. Okay. Let's look at this thing called, let me just copy some code from my slides, which are being displayed right here. Okay. Okay. So I forgot to so using standard CN up here, or using namespace standard is an alternative. Okay, so let's execute this program and follow the prompt and see what we see. Okay, so this is an odd thing that's happened here, and the use of something called cn.get is an alternative approach here. So cn, if we type a dot, again, cn is an example of an object. It's an object of this iStream class, and it has many functions. You notice that this IntelliCode is built in. This built-in feature in Visual Studio is the star symbol means it's suggested by this thing called IntelliCode. So it can anticipate what might be the most probable thing that we're going to type. So this 8 and so at end is what this means. There's a beg. This is not begging for food or anything. It's beginning. There's some complicated stuff going on here, but let's use this get function, cn.get first, and we could look at, if you notice, this 6 of 6 means there are 6 different flavors of this function called get. If I push the up arrow, as you can see, I'm hitting the up arrow in the keylogger down here. There are many different flavors of this function, and let's see. Let us pass the first initial as an argument to this function, and then say cn.get blank space. Why would we want to capture a blank space? Then maybe that's a good question. The last name is multiple characters, so this cn.get it's one way of getting a single character. So cn last name And now let's run this program again and comment out this and see if we get the anticipated output. S space Norman. Okay. And our output looks okay. It's as expected. There's another, there are many functions with, there are many functions that are defined for the CN object, many member functions, and one of them is ignore. And it only has one flavor. There's no 6 of 6 as there was for the get function. cn.ignore. And let's just pass it 0 arguments and see what happens. cn.ignore, and then we will read in the, let's change this example. Let's say enter your username. Enter a username. Maybe you're creating a username. And we read in the username, but we put this fairly interesting function first. We say cn.ignore. Why would we want to do this? That's a good question. Let's echo back at the user. And again, echo is a command in the command line, typically. Echo hello world. Echoes hello world back to us. We're echoing back user input just to make sure that we read it incorrectly. We read, that's always fun to say, read it incorrectly, not incorrectly. Not that. Okay. We read, by read it in, I mean use cn or maybe cn.get. And we also want to store it somewhere, and we want to store it in the string variable, the username. Okay, you entered colon username. Okay, but we did use the cn.ignore. So what function does this have? What did it do? You entered Norman, not S Norman, so S. Evidently, the default option for cn.ignore is to ignore the first character that a user enters in. And you can imagine certain use cases of this, like username at email.com, some email. And maybe you just want to make, your program just wants to make sure that they enter a legitimate, whatever we call this, a legitimate email .com, like Gmail or Hotmail or whatever. Maybe you want to ignore these characters for some program. You've probably bumped into something like what I'm referring to before. But if we instead say that we want to ignore, we pass in an argument, the integer 2. You see how if I hover on this tooltip is displayed. Indicating that this is an integer. If we pass in 2.0 here, that's a double. If we put an F here, that's a float, etc. Okay, so ignore 2, and we ignore 4. Snorman, and it says I entered men, so it ignored the first 4 characters. If we supply a second argument here, we can either ignore the first 4 characters or ignore until the user presses enter. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it says I entered 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it ignored 1, 2, 3, 4. Or maybe we go 1, enter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I entered 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So just different flavors of the ignore function. I don't find myself using this ignore function very often, but it's kind of fun to see this capability. I just save the file there, Control S.